phones. So when the map application first came, I use an Android phone, so it was Google Maps. Turn on the satellite image, look at your own home. And at least the first time, and maybe the student group may not be able to relate, they may have seen it from childhood, but I was very surprised the first time I saw, hey, look, you can see clearly, you can see the roof, you can see the shaft, I could see the overhead tank on my house, I could see the car parked in front of the little garden we have. And then I moved around a bit, I could see the slum in the neighborhood, and I zoomed in. I could identify roofs that had hatch, construction. I could identify tile roofs. I could identify tin roofs, concrete roofs, and I moved around. And the realization struck me that there is a lot that can be seen about a building on my phone, and it can be seen about every building in the country, every building in the world. That's about 2 billion buildings. I can read a lot of data on my phone. It will take me ages to do it manually, but the data is there in my pocket. So that was one realization. The second realization was around a project. This was 2017. There was a project we were doing in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, in Korail Basti, which is the largest slum in Dhaka. And it was on local innovation, how people cope with their conditions and what can we learn from that. And with all the wisdom we all had in the team, we went there and we assumed that the problems are going to be around frequent flooding and storms and cyclones. That's how we know Bangladesh. And very clearly and recurrently, people there were complaining about heat. And they were complaining about indoor heat, the heat inside the houses. So we installed these little data loggers, and we saw that in the month of April, when the temperature outdoors in Dhaka was about 35 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside a house in Korail Basti was about 45 degrees Celsius. So 45 degrees inside the house, so you can't step out, there's no open spaces, no spaces outside. And who's indoors during the day? It's infants, their mothers, people who are not very well, people who are very old. And that was a huge realization that we speak about heat, and we actually don't speak about heat as a disaster. So heat was not a notified disaster in India till this year. It's February of 2023 that we started recognizing heat as a disaster. And there are people who are saying that the biggest problem in their life is heat because it's 45 degrees Celsius indoors. So that was the second about invisible risks and disasters. And the third realization was in the month of May 2019, there was a cyclone called Cyclone Fomi on our eastern coast in Orissa. It hit Puri. Puri is an area where we've been working for long. There is a particular slum called Pentagota. It is supposedly the largest urban fishing slum of Asia. There's about 8,000 people living at the edge of the sea in Puri. And of course, the storm had come, it had rained a lot, it had got partly flooded. We could see houses that were destroyed, some houses were fine, some houses had their roofs gone, some were completely damaged. And two things struck. One was that, whenever there's a cyclone coming, we do a mass evacuation. We take pride in the fact that we can evacuate 1 million people in 72 hours. And you stand there and say, but not everybody needed to be evacuated. Some people needed evacuation, some didn't. And actually, if you stand there and he said that, it wouldn't take much to figure out which houses will survive and which won't. And at that time, I was reading this book called Blink, Malcolm Gladwell, which basically runs on the theory that there's a lot of decisions you take with your subconscious mind in a blink. You would take a lot of time justifying it. I could stand there and say, "Arey, ye wala kar to nahi bachega, ye wala to bach jayega." For that matter, not only how weak or strong the houses are, you can even stand and say, for those of us who've been working in this, and for those of you who just did this nice study in Bhopal with the students, you would be able to stand and say, is घर के अंदर टॉयलेट होगा, इस घर के अंदर नहीं होगा. अगर वो घर 12-15 स्क्वायर मीटर से छोटा है तो अंदर टॉयलेट भी नहीं होगा. You can actually look at a house and figure out a lot about the people living inside. ये कैसे लोग होंगे, ये कितना कमा लेते होंगे, इनके पास इंश्योरेंस होगी क्या नहीं होगी. So in a blink, looking at a house, you can see a lot about what's going on inside. Now the question was, you can see every house, that would take a lot of time to look at it, but you can see every house per se in your phone. So what can you read by looking at it from the top? Is the question that we started off with. And then that was an inquiry. Based on this, we partnered with something called the AI for Good Lab in Microsoft, based in Seattle. And we ran a whole 3-year program on how we can take this blink knowledge, take what we can see on the phones, on open source available satellite imagery, and convert that into usable information for these communities. So while I talk of AI, I do talk about AI and how it will be useful for individual families inside these informal settlements, low-income settlements. But I talk about it also in a sense of making invisible disasters visible, making invisible people visible, and disaggregating. We always say this community is at risk. The problem is that the phrase assumes that the community is homogeneous, so एक से लोग हैं, and that is never the case. Inside the community, there are many different sub-communities. Every family in a community has a different level of problems, different level of risk. Even individuals in a family may have different levels of problems and risk. We have all learned through the hard experience of the pandemic that the same threat, external threat, the same virus, the same poor water quality, the same heat will affect every individual differently. Right? So, जो COVID में हो रहा था वही इन सब चीजों में भी होगा. And if we really want to be effective, you can't have a broad brush and say this is how we are going to address the risk in a community. You have to go down to every family, every individual. Right now we are dealing with families in this. So how do I change this? I have to say next. Okay. So Mami Izudori was also quoted on our panel for this workshop. She's the head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and I'm starting with Fani, which was the cyclone. Okay, I'm gonna run these slides very quickly. So I don't want to say next again. Can I move there to do this, or can you do it? Okay. So basically, why in the earlier slide you were saying that there is Orissa has become a global good practice in the UN system because we can very accurately, IMD predicts cyclones very accurately a week in advance, and the state machinery evacuates a million people very quickly, right? This is a woman. This is from Pentapura in Puri. He says कि हर बार कोई भी साइक्लोन आता है तो हम सबको उठा के आप अंदर ले जाते हो और इस स्कूल में रिलीफ शेल्टर बना के डाल देते हो. What would be really useful is if I knew what this cyclone that is coming will do to my house, so that I can take that action accordingly. Maybe his house will not be impacted. Maybe his house will be worse, but I need to know that. That is the level of information that is really right. That's what we are solving for. That is our problem statement. Next, please. And then if we look at the current system, what is happening right now? The resolution of our hazard and risk assessment is really poor. तो आपने तो slum में जाके एक गली के लेवल पर देखा. सत्यवती बोल रही है कि मुझे मेरे घर का बता दो क्या है ना? और जनरल मत बताना मुझे हर साइक्लोन, हर फ्लड, हर हीट वेव का अलग-अलग बताना. और हम जो करंट हमारी अगर आप मेट्रोलॉजिकल वार्निंग देखेंगे, you spoke about heat stress. If you will look at how the heat wave warning comes, it's the same warning for the entire city. Right? The next 2 days temperature will be the same. Within the city, there is a huge variation. Within the city and the slum, there is a variation. There is a recent WRI study from Bombay which says that slums in a city are 6 degrees warmer than the rest of the city. That's their data from. So we know that cities in general are warmer than the countryside. That's the urban heat island affected problem. Right? So our forecast is of a very poor resolution. Our problem statement is of an individual person or family. The next thing is that the weather patterns are changing. What was happening 10 years ago is very different. What we are going through now is very different from that. So you spoke about resilience, and interestingly, there is no single agreed definition for resilience. All agencies are using their own for different projects, different ones. The one that strikes me the most and is appealing is one used by the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. IFRC का एक definition है. They say resilience is the ability to anticipate, absorb, and adapt to risks. And usually we miss the anticipation part. So even in a slum where you're working, I would say the first and the most important thing is, are people living there able to anticipate what will happen in this summer, in this monsoon, in the summers 10 years from now, so that they can build short-term and long-term strategy. So our ability to anticipate is as it is weak, and it is getting weaker because the weather patterns are changing. That's what we talk about climate change. And the last thing is that information is very difficult to decipher. The Met tells you there is a storm rainfall alert, there is a flood alert. We brace for 250 millimeters of rainfall. What does 250 millimeters of rainfall mean? I honestly, even as a planner, and I work in this sector, I don't know what it will mean in my neighborhood in Noida if 250 millimeters of rainfall happens, or if 400 happens, or if 150. I don't know the difference. Right? Then I get a warning, there is a flood warning. They've released water from the headworks in Tajewala, north of Delhi. 200,000 cusecs of water is being released. So it's like, what is this cusec? So cusec, you must have all read this in the news. A cusec is a cubic foot per second. It's about 28 liters per second. Multiplied by 200,000 is being released from a dam 100 kilometers north of me. What does it mean for me? When will my house get flooded or not? When will it get flooded? By how much? I have no clue about that. But that's the warning we still give today, right? So, and we can go on. It's the same for heat, it's the same for storms, kilometers per hour happens. So that's the problem set. So I'm not going to do details are missing. The impact is not known. We get a hazard warning. We say the temperature is going to be 50 degrees. We don't know what 50 degrees does to a human body. And our first part, the next step is how to convert a hazard warning into an impact warning. इतनी गर्मी होगी तो मुझे क्या होगा, इतनी बारिश होगी तो मेरे घर को, and then accordingly then we figure out the response. एक सवाल उठा था कि हमने सिटी से बात करी, तो सिटी उसमें क्या करेगी, इरिगेशन डिपार्टमेंट क्या करेगा, फायर डिपार्टमेंट क्या करेगा, हॉस्पिटल्स को क्या तैयारी करनी है, क्या उनको मालूम है, that kind of things then we can start. So this is how the line that we use is every rooftop tells a story. Every rooftop that you can see on your phone, you see in your house, every rooftop is almost like a QR code. It is a bit like a fingerprint. If you take the settings around it, छत से ये पता चल रहा है. If it is a thatch roof, it has mud walls. It really has a foundation. If it is if you can make out it's a tin sheet roof, then it's going to be really hot in the summers. If it's a thatch roof, it will be good for the summers, for the heat, but it will be bad when it rains and when there is a storm. So correlate and do stuff. And that's the underlying principle of how we try to learn from the house and its surroundings. And every house is unique. Every house is a very unique signature of risk to that family. And it's all on your phone. So this is how we basically run it. There is a model. We work with a coding community, and we try to say that this piece that I said, it sounds very nice in English, but it's very difficult to do for a few 100,000 houses. So how can you write a code that will start recognizing buildings and doing that? So the first part is you recognize a building footprint. You might have read there's a lot of work happening around that. Microsoft is even releasing open source data globally around that. But then after you've done that, what can you read about the surroundings? What can you read about the nature of the roof of that building, which is called rooftop identification? And then how can you create a risk formula or metrics around that? So this is deliberately not a very high resolution image. It's a pixelated image. This is the kind you would find for outside a city, even on Google Earth. And in this we could identify, this is again from Pentagon, that was the first place where we started work. We could identify about 13 different kinds of roof types and figure out what kind of signatures they would create. And once you run the model, this is the kind of data that goes into it. What is the hazard that is coming to your way? Flood, cyclone, heat wave. What is your level of exposure? We're looking at proximity, right next to the river or the sea coast, then there is something else that happens. What is your vulnerability parameter that is arising from the building, within the building itself? And how do you add this together and come to a risk score that will then help you figure out what action to take next? This is how we then converted it into a dashboard. So this is what we take to cities. We're working about 20 location. You can figure out which building this, I think, is probably more than that. You can figure out what's happening before a cyclone. You can hover over every building and say, why is this building at risk? What is contributing to that risk? So that we can figure out what steps need to be taken. Next, please. We're doing this for flooding, heat waves, and earthquakes so far, but not applicable to the Next, please. And I'll now walk you through a few images. This is how we actually take these warnings. So one part is to figure this out. This can be done by a tech team anywhere globally. But the effectiveness that is important is when this goes to people, how do people believe what you're saying, understand what you're saying, and actually take action? If you don't take action, तो कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. Morning we were talking, some of us were talking about the East Japan earthquake and the tsunami that happened 10 odd years ago. One of the most depressing thing for people we know who work in that zone, people certainly, was that Japan is known for drilling this information down and for the practice that the elementary schools se padhate hain bachcho. And there was a warning, there was enough warning, and people did not evacuate. And that's why the casualty levels were so high. So, behavior of people and all that you've done can still be a part. Slip between the cup and lip. सब कुछ करने के बाद भी नहीं हुआ. There are scientists, there are people who went into a depression because उन्होंने साल पूरी जिंदगी लगा दी warning थी और लोग निकले नहीं. So why did people do it, right? So how do you make that happen? And the effort that one can do is find credible voices inside the communities. People they will trust, people they will understand, and how do you make that happen? So feet on the streets, local volunteers, local respected social references are really important. So this is how the warning goes door to door. So the person, the volunteer has a map which is telling him, say, this is East Delhi, Mayur Vihar के पास Islam है, किशन को जिसमें हम काम कर रहे हैं. उसके बाद ये नक्शा आपको मालूम है कि उसी हीट वेव में कौन-कौन से घर हैं जिनका इंडोर टेम्परेचर बहुत हाई रहेगा. And we constantly install data loggers and we take it reading. The model keeps learning every year. It gets better and better at its accuracy. And then the person goes lane to lane and says, "यार अगले 2 दिन थोड़े मुश्किल होने वाले हैं." So the older people, we alert the primary health center and what steps need to be taken. That gets them. Next week. So this is how this is the image. This is how we get a simulation of where the indoor. This is all indoor. We are not looking at outdoor right now. That simulation happens. And then you go talk to people. Now comes the action part. अगर ये पता चल गया तो लोग क्या करेंगे? पहले तो पता करते हैं कि गर्मी में क्या प्रॉब्लम आ रही है. So starting when I was a child, I was always told don't go outdoor during the hottest part of the day. लू लग जाएगी, which literally is heat stroke हो जाएगी. Heat stroke can lead to death. Body stops. When a fever it stops cooling. The newer problem we are facing now is of heat stress. You may not die of it, but your productivity goes down. BP goes up, सो नहीं पा रहे हो, आंखों में जलन हो रही है, सिर में दर्द हो रहा है, अगले दिन बच्चे स्कूल में नहीं पढ़ पा रहे हैं, person is not able to go to work that day. So it starts as a range of things that you have, and the last and the worst can be nausea and fainting. This is the survey that we do on the hospitals to figure out what it is. And this is an intervention from this summer of 2023. We took a few of these houses. We know 80% of the heat gain is roughly happening from the roof. We know there is a cool roof approach of painting them white, which gives us a relief of about 2 to 3 degrees, but that's not good enough when your indoor is 45, right? So we're looking more at heavier roofs, increasing thermal mass, insulation through different ways, recycled material options, roof लगाएं, पुरानी thermocol लगाएं, cardboard लगाएं, लेकिन लगाएंगे तो fire risk बढ़ सकती है, उसको कैसे रोकें? Industrial insulation sheet लगाएं तो cost बढ़ेगी, लेकिन कुछ फायदा होगा. Different options, the options that I'm showing you. When the outdoor temperature is 39.2 degrees, this is April of 2023. This is the range of houses or temperature that we get inside houses. They got from 45.8 down to 33.1. So you can actually achieve a 12-degree difference indoors by doing an intervention which is literally about 4,000 to 5,000 rupees per hour. That's data logger data that we calculate, that we capture. The second interesting thing that we started doing, we work with we reached out to the meteorological department, is you might have read, this is the first year the Indian Met Department started talking about heat index. वो हमारे फोन में कभी-कभी आता है, it's going to be 40 degrees, but it feels like 45. That feels like is the indexing part, इसमें कि humidity comes in. our psyche is उससे temperature देते हैं. तो जब 49 हो गया दिल्ली में, oh God, it's 49, स्कूल बंद करने चाहिए, this that the other. But if you look at the index, then 49 with a 10% humidity, right there, right, is still in the yellow zone. But a 35 degrees Celsius with an 80% humidity, which is what happened in the month of August, is in the red zone where you should be. It's worse. So 35 can be worse than 49 if your humidity is really up. We don't understand this. Communities that are facing this don't understand this at all. So in Gharam they can't afford air conditioning, but they put these coolers and they run them and they're only bumping up. So in the data logger data, you also see that not only indoor humidity is higher than outdoor humidity, and that's making things worse. So we're trying to sit with people and make them understand that here, ये problem है.